Good morning, everyone. This is Mike O'Malley here with the Hurricane Season 2020 update, part of the Hurricane Outlook and discussion for August 21st, 2020. This update is recorded around 9:34 a.m. Eastern Time. Well, out here in the Atlantic Basin, we have a couple of systems to watch. First of all, starting with Tropical Storm Laura, it has now been upgraded to a tropical storm. This was previous Tropical Depression 13, and we talked about this yesterday. It was very loosely organized and still is today, although we do now have a closed, trackable low-level center, and maximum sustained winds are up to about 40 knots with gusts up to 50 or 45 miles per hour gusting to 55. Tropical storm warnings will be replaced here at the 11 o'clock advisory with the tropical storm warnings for portions of the Turks and Caicos over here, and also we're going to have to watch for potential land impacts to directly to portions of the Northern Antilles, Puerto Rico, and potentially even Hispaniola in the Dominican Republic. There is a slight possibility that this might track further west. And again, you can see the initial movement right now is west at 21 miles per hour, a pressure of about 1,008 millibars. Now, one other thing to note, this is still expected to become a hurricane out here in the Gulf of Mexico once it passes like in through the Turks and Caicos and then in through portions of the Florida Straits and in through the far eastern Gulf. This is still expected to be a hurricane sitting off the Florida west coast. And again, we talked about how there's considerable uncertainty regarding the eventual evolution, and we'll talk about that here in a moment. But again, right now, the main thing is that for you folks down here in the Lesser Antilles and also for Puerto Rico and also the Turks and Caicos and even Hispaniola and the Dominican Republic and Haiti need to be monitoring the progress of the system. Of course, if you're in any watches or warnings, make sure to take the necessary precautions to stay safe, mitigating loss to life and property. Now you can see here, this is the visible satellite shot this morning from tropicaltidbits.com. This is the mesosector here. And again, you can see a lot more convection is associated, a lot more shower and thunderstorm activity is associated with Laura this morning. And it does look a little bit better, but we'll show you under the hood here in just a moment. But for the time being, this remains still a very disorganized system, and our mid-level center and low-level center are actually displaced in this area of convection, with the low-level center possibly being somewhere up in this region and the low-level center being possibly somewhere in this region. So these two centers are actually disaligned. They're not vertically stacked, which prevents significant intensification. Now, we'll show here why that might change, but also some of the complexities here over the next couple of days or so as this continues to move off towards the west or northwest. And we can see that here. Now, this is from the College of DuPage site. But here's Puerto Rico, that's Hispaniola, Dominican Republic, Haiti right there, St. Croix, the U.S. British Virgin Islands in here. Those areas are right in there, and this is now Laura starting to come into the picture a tad bit more. And again, a lot is going to hinge on whether or not this is actually going to be able to, actually align its its low-level and mid-level centers together over the next couple of days, because it is a very real possibility that because right now recon is finding the supposed center a little bit further to the south, that this actually ends up tracking pretty much right over the island of Puerto Rico, either that or going over Hispaniola, and a lot is going to hinge on whether or not that actually happens. And we can see what I'm talking about here in the reconnaissance aircraft from this morning. And again, this is the reconnaissance aircraft that's in there right now going into the storm. And you can see that, so here we have what could be a low-level center, and then here we have an inferred either low or mid-level center. And these two are not vertically aligned. These are actually displaced here by several miles, probably on the order of about 50 miles or so that this is displaced, which means that the one circulation is on the edge of this deep convection, and one circulation is almost on the edge of another deep convective burst. So these two centers are not vertically aligned, and thus it actually does not allow for significant organization and intensification. And that's kind of been the expectation kind of going forward, is that these two centers are still vertically disaligned, and they're not allowing for a more robust intensification across those areas. And that's one of the things that we're going to really have to monitor here going forward, is if these can vertically align. And that's going to have implications on both track and intensity going forward. And we can see that here illustrated quite well by the spaghetti plots. This is from coming from tropicaltidbits.com. And a couple of things that we'll kind of point out here is that, first and foremost, is that you can really see that the tracks have shifted almost further due south. Now, this could be in response to this supposed new center location, but again, it's quite unsure whether or not one of these is either the low or mid-level centers. I'm not exactly 100% sure, because if this area is the low-level center, that means that it's actually north and west of the mid-level center, or I'm sorry, yeah, north and west of the mid-level center. And that will be important going forward. So again, these tracks are very subject to change, but as of this moment, most of them take it over the island of Puerto Rico, and almost then directly near or over Hispaniola, directly near or over Cuba, and basically then adjoining this into the Gulf of Mexico. And, while this implies that we have relatively high confidence, that's not necessarily the case. And again, Levi put this up here, do not, use this map to seek official info, because this is not necessarily implying that we actually have a relative high confidence. And you can see what we call outliers that are, either further west or further, up towards Florida and the coast here. So it's not necessarily confirming that one place is either out of the woods or not. And again, the current Hurricane Center forecast does still has this cone of uncertainty kind of pushed through west central Florida. So if you live there, do not necessarily count your chickens before they hatch. Meaning, in this instance, don't, write this storm off, because there could still be impacts. And we'll talk about that here in a moment as we kind of go forward with time. But this is going to be the big determining factor as we progress with time. And a real quick look, the intensity guidance, again, is all over the place, with, a couple showing, this reaching hurricane intensity, and a couple of others just dropping this off, especially the AVIN. That's basically the GFS interpolated. That just drops it off a cliff. The HMON, for what it's worth, is no longer significantly developing it, basically where it is right now, and dropping it off. And then other models, the UK, the CMC, you really only have the HWRF and the CTC, which really isn't a good model, but only the HWRF is really bringing it significant. So we'll see. And again, for what it's worth, the HWRF does have the, obviously it's a hurricane specific model, and it does have the integrated, data from the reconnaissance aircraft that's been in there. It's been uploaded into the data. It's been assimilated. And, so the models worked with that. And, we'll see. Again, I'm very reluctant to say that this is going to be anything that significant, but I can't rule anything out. You know what I'm saying? And obviously it's for good measure, whether it's a Category 1 or a Category 4 or whatever model is showing, there's probably going to be some impacts to talk about. Even if it's just rain and maybe 30-mile-an-hour winds, that's still impacts. That's still going to produce some impacts. It's still going to disrupt your day. So that is still something to talk about as we progress forward with time. Now, we can see here, this is the 850 millibar relative vorticity product from the Central University of Wisconsin-Madison site. Again, these reds and whites are higher cyclonic spin at the 5,000 foot level, and you can really see where our circulation center is, right in through here. And again, this is still relatively elongated. You can kind of see this relatively elongated nature of all this vorticity in here. Now, this is bundling a little bit better, and you know, you can in fact kind of see this and again infer it that this is getting better organized. And in fact, again, the visible satellite shots kind of confirm that yes, this is getting a little bit better organized this morning, and you know, it's a tropical storm, you know, and again, for that reason, there is going to be impacts for the islands. You know, this isn't just going to be your heavy rainfall event where you might get, you know, 2 inches of rain, everything's over. No, you know, some places, especially mountainous terrain of Puerto Rico, you know, you guys could see, you know, upwards of 3 to 5 inches of rain. It wouldn't completely surprise me. You know, this is a fairly decent area of deeper convection, you know, showers and thunderstorms. And, you know, this will eventually get picked up by the Puerto Rico radar out here. So that's going to be one good thing, is that we'll be able to see the radar structure here after not too long. So we'll be able to kind of use that integrated with, you know, basically integrated with all of the different, you know, products and stuff like that from, you know, the Air Force reconnaissance or NOAA reconnaissance, Air Force reconnaissance, etc., and satellite data. But, you know, this does show that, yes, this is getting a little bit better organized this morning. And if it does persist, you know, yes, this will be something to watch. And again, just for a reference, a stronger storm is going to move further off towards the north and east of the land masses here. It's going to move further north away from the land masses. And again, for what it's worth, the National Hurricane Center did not necessarily have this becoming a tropical storm until tomorrow morning or afternoon. It was only expected to be a tropical storm then. So there is some discrepancy in regards to that. And again, you know, it's not time to write this off if you're, you know, living in the Bahamas, if you're living in Florida, the Gulf Coast states, whatever. But it's also something just to kind of keep in mind that, you know, this might be a situation where this actually tracks further west and right over the islands and completely disrupts the circulation center. But as we've seen time and time again, these systems like to sneak north of us, and we just have to watch it because, again, that has implications on track and intensity going forward in the longer run. So that will be something, obviously, that we're going to really have to keep an eye on because, you know, things are obviously going to change here with time. Now, we can kind of see what's going on here on the GFS forecast. This is the, you know, this is basically your higher levels in the atmosphere and basically your cyclonic vorticity in the atmosphere. And basically the areas out here kind of highlighted in this brown and orange, that's actually basically your shear in the atmosphere, your trophiness, etc. And basically all this blue is basically your cyclonic winds favoring, you know, divergence and stuff like that. And convergence and all that good stuff. Basically a lot of meteorological terms here. But we can see two things here. First of all, Tropical Depression 14 and now Tropical Storm Laura. Now, first of all, again, here in the GFS forecast, what you're looking at here is a potential vorticity streamer. This PV streamer has been inducing some of that shear across Laura. And one of the main reasons why is because this just isn't strong enough to fan out its outflow and kind of cause a diabetic outflow almost to circulate around the entire storm environment. And what that's caused is the shear, because the storm is still shallower, it's allowing a lot more of the PV streamer and a lot more of that shear to be induced on the cyclone because the you know, the outflow can't necessarily put up a brick wall between this and an unhealthy and basically an unhealthy environment. So right now, that is actually allowing for that shear to be more induced into the cyclone and et cetera, et cetera. So it is going to be a little bit of time before we actually get more robust intensification. And if we look here even on the GFS, it's not really excited by it. It keeps it a weak system going north of the islands, basically. But it keeps it weak because this PV streamer is still induced in this environment out and through here. It's still inducing some vertical wind shear. We'll talk about Tropical Depression 14 here in a moment. But you can see it keeps it relatively weak. This PV streamer is able to just keep inducing this vertical wind shear. Now, the shear direction eventually changes, but you still get shear, and it's just, you don't even see a well-defined cyclone here in the mid to upper levels of the atmosphere. And this is one of the things that you don't even see kind of going forward in the GFS forecast. You see absolutely zilch coming from the GFS. It keeps it weak. It keeps it, relatively north of the islands. But it's a weak cyclone, and the GFS forecast doesn't do anything, most likely in response to land interaction potentially and the potential vorticity streamer in the atmosphere. We can kind of even see that here on the 700 to 400 millibar relative humidity. What we're looking at here is basically your browns. This is your dry air in the atmosphere, and your greens is basically more moisture available in the atmosphere. Again, that's Tropical Depression 14 out there, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But you can really see our cyclone isn't really well defined. Actually, you can see where our low-level sensor is here, located by this isobar. This one single closed isobar in the GFS forecast is right about here, and that's at about 8 o'clock this morning. And the mid-level center is actually displaced back down here, and we'll actually highlight this in red. So that's the mid-level versus low-level center out there. And again, you can kind of see that these are not aligned, and that is correct, that these are not aligned to each other. And we go forward, and this moisture just does not want to consolidate into an actual cyclone. And again, some of this is also in part because some dry air is kind of working on the front side of this. Now you notice there is some dry air to the back, but it has relatively moist environment on the back side of this, so that's not the problem. But land interaction kind of keeps it weak, it keeps it disorganized, and carries whatever is there into the Gulf. Now, there's also another caveat to that, which we'll talk about here in a moment. But if we take a look here at the water vapor satellite shot here, you can kind of see this dry air. Now, first of all, basically, this is the water vapor satellite. In these darker colors out here, this is basically your dry stable air. And you can see that dry stable air way back out here, and some dry stable air way out in front of it over towards Hispaniola, or towards the north and east of Hispaniola. Near the storm environment, it's not as bad, but we still have some drier air near Barbados and the southern Lesser Antilles at the current moment. And again, a cyclonic spin is a counterclockwise circulation, which means this dry air is getting wrapped around into the circulation from time to time. Now, one of the things that's kind of benefiting this right now is that we don't have necessarily your type of convection that is pulsing and going back down, pulsing and going back down, collapsing. You have a relatively sustained area of deep convection that has persisted, but notice what you see, some of these arc clouds. So, yes, there is still some dry air in the atmosphere, but you don't notice as many arc-like features out here. You can see only one here, maybe one over here. That's not a lot. That is certainly not a lot, and that is indicative of a moisture environment, a more moisture-rich environment out in front of where the cyclone is going. And if we take a look here at the H-Wharf, and again, I'm not going to show that much of the H-Wharf for specific reasons, but this is the 6C run here coming from the H-Wharf. And keep in mind, this does have the recon data integrated with it at this point in time. So we'll move forward here, and again, there is no clear center. You can see here on the H-Wharf, you actually have your center displaced. Again, that's your center displaced from that area. Maybe an inferred additional center somewhere back in this vicinity in through here. It's very disorganized is the bottom line. We move this forward. As it approaches the northern Lesser Antilles, St. Croix, and Puerto Rico, it remains disorganized. And that is certainly a good sign. This remains disorganized. Pressure is only about 1,006 millibars or whatever. But you can kind of see where our inferred center is, maybe another center down here, maybe something out here. there's multiple center vorticities out here kind of consolidating and trying to compete for one another. And this is one of the things that really is going to take the most importance here, because if we get a center reformation that actually ends up further down here to the south, it's not going to have an opportunity necessarily, because of the strong ridge to the north, to just get evected to the north. Instead, you might have a more westerly / northwesterly track. But conversely, like the H-Wharf shows, there's the possibility you actually get a center reformation further north, and it kind of moves further to the north. Another possible center right here. And eventually, what actually ends up happening, you can see maybe that this center becomes dominant, moves near or just over Hispaniola, and actually starts to intensify down here into a cyclone at this time. And this will be a strong tropical storm near Cuba and Andros Island out here. This is Cuba out here, that's Andros Island, and this is Nassau up and through here in the Bahamas. And again, this is a certain possibility, but only if the center can actually remain either to the north or reform further north up here north of the islands, and not get impacted directly by any significant land impacts. So, yes, there is a possibility. Now, to what benefits that land interaction may have is a very complex situation. First of all, land interaction can help to tighten up the circulation, because it's frictional convergence. Basically, land in these cyclones actually increase frictional convergence as they start to slow down as they approach the land. And that is important, because that can induce a tightening of the circulation in this vicinity, and a new cyclone could either form south of here or north of here, and that's very important going forward with time. So there's a lot of intricacies and possibilities regarding tropical depression, or tropical storm Laura, as time goes on. So again, for you folks in the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico, St. Croix, the Northern Lesser Antilles, even for that matter, all the way up and through the Bahamas, Cuba, Hispaniola, Florida, and the Gulf Coast states, you are not out of the woods quite yet. And again, a lot, and I mean a lot, is going to hinge on the next 24 hours or so to see whether or not this does have land interaction, and if it does, how much of land interaction it has, because that plays a fairly significant role going forward. And there is still a wide range of possibilities, both on track and intensity, going forward with time. Now, moving on here to talk about Tropical Depression 14. Right now, it is still a broad system, but we can still see right now, or we can see now rather, that we have showers and thunderstorms on the southern periphery of the system that are trying to get rotated in. And this does look a little bit better organized this morning than it did earlier, certainly last night, with a, not so much of a closed low-level center at all. And again, for right now, this is going to remain a tropical storm, but a strong one on approach into the Yucatan Peninsula. For that reason, it's very hard to see, but we do have hurricane watches that are in effect for portions of the Yucatan Peninsula, as this could be near hurricane strength as it approaches the Yucatan, and then eventually is expected to become a hurricane out here in the Gulf of Mexico before making landfall either somewhere in Texas or Louisiana here over the next few days or so. We can see here that the Air Force reconnaissance aircraft that was in there did still find that there is a closed low-level center, albeit kind of moving around. And this actually moved a little bit further off towards the north and east than previously thought. Again, this was the previous center fix, and this is the new center fix out here. So this is the old center fix, and this is the new center fix out here. And again, what is going to matter now is actually whether or not we have more center reformations either further north or south. And again, these are going to play a very big role also going forward with time, because of how it either interacts with land or the potential interaction with Tropical Storm Laura in the Gulf of Mexico at some point. And that is a very real possibility. And again, this further northeast movement also precludes significant land interaction down in this vicinity. So it does help to maybe at least induce a little bit more availability for the cyclone to actually intensify a little bit further with time. And that is certainly a very real possibility as time goes on here. And again, right now the tracks are very uncertain. Again, there is a wide range of possibilities here from eastern Louisiana all the way in through eastern and central Texas here for a landfall point. And again, a lot is going to hinge on whether or not we get additional center reformation south here or north over the next few hours. And again, how strong this gets before land interaction with the Yucatan Peninsula is going to remain to be the big question. Again, you can see that some of the models very limitedly have any sort of land interaction with the Yucatan Peninsula, just going over land maybe for a brief few hours before kind of spitting out here into the Gulf, while others have this over land for a longer period of time. And again, there's a wide range of possibilities that are, kind of invoked through this area. There's a very wide range. And we can see here that on the GFS forecast, this is the same product that we were looking at for Tropical Storm Laura out here. And again, what's happening is we have a trough of low pressure that's kind of digging out in this vicinity out here. And that is going to help to slow down this cyclone and eventually pull it northward. But again, as we go forward with time, you can almost see, however, how some of this moisture is getting strung out all the way across Florida and into portions of the southwestern Atlantic. And that is because of what's happening here. You can see this big trough axis that's kind of digging out in through here. Excuse me. Let me drink some water before I start coughing more. Much better. All right. We can see that there is an induced trough axis in through here, and there is actually this trough right in through that position. Now, as we go forward with time here, you can see how this trough actually amplifies into the Gulf here. And again, if this happens to move further off towards the north, look what's going to be awaiting. There is going to be some shear awaiting, and we can also take another look at that here on the 700 to 400 millibar relative humidity, that you can see all this general humidity and moisture is actually getting very strung out and pulled further to the north into even Florida, for example. And we've already seen some response in through that. Again, we can see why that is, that there's already a partial response. This is the trough right now, but you can see it is stringing some of the moisture out into Florida. And if you're along, especially the west coast, you've noticed that we've had a lot more rain over the last couple of days. And that is actually, especially yesterday, that's actually in response a little bit to this trough pulling up moisture from Tropical Depression 14 and streaming it northward. And that is a very real possibility going forward, that even if this manages to make landfall, go over towards the Texas direction, the, trough in through here is actually pushing a lot of this moisture away from its common axis, and that's very detrimental to the cyclone. It may limit significant intensification going forward. Real quickly, this is the sea surface temperatures, the actual sea surface temperatures, and again, regarding to tropical depression, or tropical storm Laura rather, it's sitting within this environment out through here and traveling into this environment. So it has a fairly significant water, temperature increase going forward. While it doesn't look like much, it certainly is. And the same can be basically said here for Tropical Depression 14, that it will encounter a fairly favorable environment going forward with time. So there is a lot to watch here, and a lot of complicated, intricacies that could happen with both systems over the next couple of days or so. And actually, if we jump back real quickly to the GFS forecast, you can see where these two systems might actually have a little bit of an interaction going forward. This is Laura now and Tropical Depression 14, which will likely be a tropical storm later today or tomorrow. So Very complex forecast, and again, it remains to be seen whether or not this actually will come across the islands for Laura, or whether it will sneak to the north and get further north into the Bahamas and Florida and the Turks and Caicos. It remains to be seen, and again, that is something that we'll be monitoring throughout the next couple of days or so. Again, I am on Twitter at MikeRomali1. Go follow me there. Links will be down in the description down below. Of course, I will have another update later this afternoon. All right? Hope you all have a great rest of your morning and early afternoon. Of course, I am Mike Romali. I'll talk to you guys again later this afternoon. Stay safe, everyone.